Earthworm Jim, the wacky, insane classic franchise that many people remember to this day. Now, Jim doesn't have many games and hasn't been around since 2010. We try to forget that remake. Aside from ports, he only has 2 games to his name. Only 2. Jim was initially created with the formation of 2 companies back in the early 90s. Under the roof of Playmates Toys and developed by Shiny Entertainment, Earthworm Jim was made and released on multiple platforms, including the SNES and Sega Genesis. I got around to playing it just a few years ago via the Genesis version on the Wii Shop channel, rest in peace, and only beat it more recently. It was actually Earthworm Jim 2 that introduced me to the franchise because I had it earlier in my childhood. But I wanted to talk about this game in particular. As the cartoon series explains Jim's origins, through the soil he did crawl, and a supersuit did indeed fall. Jim was just a dirt-eating, chewy length of worm flesh, but all of that came to a crashing end. And the rest is history. Jim's new purpose in life is now to defend the Earth, rescue Princess What's-Her-Name, yes, that's what she's called, whilst avoiding the bad guys who want to take the suit back from him so that the evil queen, pulsating, bloated, festering, sweaty, pus-filled, malformed slug for a butt can take over the universe with it. That is also her official name. This game is weird as hell, but that's exactly where its charm comes from. Tell me when you find another game that lets you play as a freaking worm with a gun shooting a snowman in the fiery depths of hell. There's even businessmen in the hell level, I goddamn love it. The world of Earthworm Jim is a beautiful random assortment of alien-like worlds filled with crazy elements and obstacles that really know how to challenge players. Not to mention throw them off, because I assure you there will be parts where you'll just scratch your head and wonder what it is exactly you're supposed to do to advance. But we'll get to that later. Everything in the world of Jim makes no sense just for the sake of not making any sense. Earthworm Jim has quite the unique mix of levels. While you have your standard platforming run and gun levels, something new always pops up. Like how in between every stage you get a chance to grab an extra life through a 3D-like space race. Or in the stage For Pete's Sake, which is basically an escort mission where you have to guide your friend Peter Puppy to the end of the level. And be sure to pay attention in this one because if you don't, he will kill you when he gets hurt. Jim mixes things up and keeps the game fresh, no matter how strange it gets. Wonder if that means anything later. And it's not just the worlds, the cast of characters are just as insane. Aside from the main 3 mentioned earlier, the rest consist of a slew of villains under the Queen's rule. You've got Psycrow, the bounty hunter, Professor Monkey for a head, Sergeant Snot, Doc Duodenum? Hang on one second. Gross. These guys are the game's bosses, and you have no idea what kind of confrontation you're gonna have with them. One level, I get Bob the Goldfish, and you literally just walk up to his bowl and push it over. But in other levels, the bosses don't give in, so... Whoa there, friend. Back to Adult Swim, you freak. I have to admit though, this is one of the most creative array of characters I've seen from a 90s video game. And what's cool is, these guys even show up in the cartoon. In case you were interested on the lore in which Princess What's-Her-Name is the twin sister of the evil queen. Somehow. Of course, I have to mention the music in this game as well. It's a mix of original techno and electronic sounding tracks with some remixes of classical music thrown in there. Interesting choices, but they fit this game just perfectly. So with your plasma gun in hand and head whip at the ready, you're good to go on this adventure. But there's one little thing I haven't mentioned yet. Talk about a recurring theme, but this game is also hard as shit. Another classic game that pulls no punches and will punish every little mistake that you make. While it's a generally challenging game, there are a couple of issues that Jim has that contributes to the difficulty in an unfair way. For example, the hit detection. Where the fuck is it? In some parts of the game, you need to use Jim's head whip technique to get across gaps via the grappling hooks around the world. But my god, you need to be spot on for this thing to work. Like, the tip of Jim's head needs to hit the hooks perfectly, otherwise you're not going anywhere. I spent a little more time than I wanted to trying to get past the second level, which just so happens to be full of hooks. The hooks! The hooks! But hey, I guess after that, you should be a damn master at the whip, so no other obstacles like that should be an issue in the future, right? Oh, come on now. Like I mentioned earlier, the other problem with Jim is that the levels don't make it clear where you're supposed to go. Let's take the secret level Who Turned Out the Lights as an example. Towards the end of the level, you stumble upon this huge thing in the dark, and the only way to go after you encounter it seems to be back where you came in. But I would hit a dead end and die. And I was killed here continuously with no indication of what I was supposed to do next. Common sense tells me to run in the opposite direction, but I'm being punished for it here. And yes, I know this is a 90s game, so I'm gonna get slapped around a lot, but that's not an excuse for leaving me completely in the dark. This wasn't the only part I got stuck on either, because oh boy, it only gets tougher from here. The level Snot a Problem. I see this shit in my nightmares. There are 3 rounds in which you face off against Sergeant Snot in a bungee jumping competition. You have to hit him against the walls to break his rope whilst avoiding his attacks as well. And you have to watch out for when you get close to the bottom, because if you're at the wrong end of the screen at the wrong time... Wow, blood? So much for that silly cartoon violence. Jim just gets chomped in half. And then there's also Down the Tubes, which is even worse. This is where the whole no clear path issue really comes into play. In Down the Tubes, there are areas in which you need to travel in a submarine and make it to the next checkpoint before the timer runs out. If you run out of time, you're dead. But there are so many paths in this big open area of water, I don't know where I'm supposed to go. Some will take you to the checkpoints, others won't. It's the long way around. And this is only level 3. Like, god damn! And it is not loose with the time at all. You're either gonna make it by the skin of your ass or get crushed under the pressure. Most of the time, I'll just get sick of Down the Tubes and I'll skip it via cheat code that takes me to the debug menu. Cheater. Bite me. So at this point, I bet you're wondering, how terrible is the last level? Well, don't you worry. It is a complete and utter nightmare. Welcome to Buttville. Appropriately titled because this level gets right up my ass. Yes, this is going to be the toughest challenge in the game because it's the final level. You gotta earn that ending. But I was not prepared to be relentlessly curb stomped over and over again until I was nearly perfect at it. Just getting past the first part is hard because it's full to the brim with spikes that deal a ridiculous amount of damage. I don't see why the health bar is still here at this point when spikes do 40% on contact. You need to helicopter down while avoiding these spikes, and if you touch even one, Jim will go apeshit and kill himself. There's some pretty crazy enemies at this point too. The endless waves of bees, the frogs, and then there's... oh god. Keep them away, let me just sneak past and... And they have the nerve to throw a mini-boss right before you fight the queen herself, who is the easiest part of this stage if you know what you're doing. You could shoot her to death, which takes a while, but one perfectly aimed whip attack will end the fight immediately. After all of that nonsense, Jim finally reaches the princess what's-her-name, only for her to be crushed by the cow that was launched from the very start of the game. But even Jim knows that every cloud has a silver lining. And yeah, that's pretty much the first Earthworm Jim game. Despite some of its flaws and difficulty, I still say it's worth a play. It's creative, full of humor, and pulls 0 punches. A great game overall, however, it's in the sequel where most of Jim 1's problems are rectified. So I definitely recommend that one if you still want to try Jim, but not tear your hair out while doing it. Anyways, thank you guys for watching, and stick to the channel for what I have to put out in the future. Like, comment, ring the bell, and subscribe. Alright guys, peace.